everyone. Welcome to the Center for European Studies. My name is Sebastian Royo, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Iberian Study Group with Sofia Perez. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the center, and particularly in a day like today. I got so many emails during the day telling me that they were planning to come, but that because of the storm they couldn't come. So thank you for ignoring the terrible weather and being here. So as you all know, Spain is suffering one of probably of the worst crises that it has suffered since the Civil War. And most of the focus, particularly at the international level, has been on the economic and the social impact of the crisis. But in reality, there has been also another development which is as critical for Spain, which has been the increasing demands, particularly on the part of Catalonia, for independence, which has led to a potential constitutional crisis. And this is something that will have very serious implications, not just for Spain and Catalonia, but for Europe. So we've put together what I think is a spectacular panel today to discuss this issue. I want to alert everyone that this event will be recorded and will be posted on the web eventually. So keep it in mind as you make questions or participate. And before before I introduce the panel, I want to just very quickly explain the format. Is going to be each one of the panelists is going to speak for about 15 minutes, and I'm going to try to be very firm with time. Then we will have a very short period of time for discussion, and then we will open it to the rest of you so you can have questions or comments to the presentations that I give. And very quickly, because I want them to have time for the presentations, I'm going to introduce the panelists in the order that they are seated. We have Carles Boix. He's the Robert Garrett Professor of Politics and Public Affairs at the Department of Politics at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. Laia Balcell, she is an assistant professor of political science at Duke University. We have Thomas Jeffrey Miley. He is a lecturer of political sociology in the Department of Sociology at the University of Cambridge, the other Cambridge on the other side of the pond. And Ignacio Molina, who is a senior analyst for Europe at the Elcano Royal Institute in Madrid. This is one of the leading think tanks in Spain, and an associate professor of political science at the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. The order in which we're going to go, Laia is going to go first, Carl second, then Jeff, and last Nacho. So, thank you.
Let me start by thanking everyone, and especially Sebastian, for inviting me today here. It's a big pleasure and a privilege to be in this panel. And the objective of my presentation is to give some sense on what are the causes, what are the historical and political determinants of this support for Catalan independence that we have been observing in the recent times. So, well, I assume that all of you know where's Catalonia. So Catalonia is basically this territory marked in red in the northeast of Spain, bordering France and the Mediterranean Sea. And what's the story? Well, so I cannot like give much details about the history of Catalonia, but well, in the recent past, basically, there are like crucial events, right, that are kind of explaining what's going on today. So one is the transition to democracy in Spain that took place in the late 70s. So the new Spanish constitution was approved in 1978. And that was, the constitution was voted in referendum in 6 December 1978. There's also the new Statute of Catalonia in 1979, which was also voted in referendum in October 1979. Catalonia, with the transition to democracy, recovered the political autonomy that had lost with the Civil War, so by the 1939. So one thing that it's not very much highlighted in the media, and I think that it's important, is that the Catalans was a really crucial social movement in the democratization process in Spain. So this poster is an example of what happened like in September 11, which is a national day in Catalonia. That's why we have different demonstrations in September 11. This was a demonstration that took place in 1977. That basically there were like 1.2 million people congregated asking for freedom for the political prisoners, and amnesty for these political prisoners of the Franco regime, and also Estatut d'Autonomia, which was like this sort of like constitution for the region of Catalonia, for like regional constitution, right? That should allow for a number of guarantees on the political autonomy that had to be reestablished, and that was reestablished with the democracy. About the Spanish Constitution of 1978. So it was widely supported in a referendum all over Spain. Yet it must be said that the constitution was not totally well accepted by some Catalan sectors. What happened is that, in a way, the shadow of the dictatorship was too strong to vote no to this constitution. And I'm going to just put you an example on that, which is very illustrative of that. It must be also noted that in the Basque Country, the constitution had less than 50% turnout, so it was less supported than the rest of the country. An example of what I was saying about the Catalan sector. So this is a couple of citations of Montserrat Roig, who was a left-wing Catalan writer who's passed away 20 years ago, but who had written a lot and was writing a lot in the newspapers during this period of time in the late 70s, early 80s. So one thing that she said in one of her newspaper articles, was the following, right? I do not like the Constitution. This Constitution is not mine. Nobody has asked me if I like Spain or not. Second thing that she was saying in the same article, I do not like the Constitution, but I think that I will vote yes, because it is the smallest of all evils. And she was also saying, voting no to this Constitution would put me together with all these people that are going against my freedom, my liberties as a Catalan, as a woman, and I don't want to go with these people, so that's why at the end I'm going to vote yes. So in a way, I just want to show you that, to show the paradox, that are like the complexity of things at that period of time, and that the complexity nowadays as well, of course. So the Estado de Autonomía is basically, it's been somehow equalized to a federal state, but there are a number of shortcomings, right, of the Estado de Autonomía that do not really make it comparable to a federal state, though. So in a way, in the 78 Constitution, there were number of administrative and political, there were some ways in which regions and nationalities, not nations, because the Spanish Constitution only recognized that there was only one nation, the Spanish nation, right? But there were regions and nationalities that could acquire administrative and political power. The process was somehow left kind of open-ended, partly because of the conditions under which the transition was taking place, right? The shadow of the dictatorship, the power of the military. But so anyway, this led to a decentralization process that ended up being flexible, with having different types of regional communities, some that had minimal autonomy, some that had medium autonomy, and the foral autonomies of Basque Country, Navarra, that had economic autonomy and had higher level of autonomy overall, right? The autonomy in Catalonia, it's been varying somehow. The implementation of the statute has been implemented gradually and kind of conditional to the changing political climate, with first kind of a restrictive legislation in 1981, a faster process of devolution under minority central governments from 93 to 2000, and some recentralization after 2000 with the majority of a popular party in the central government. So all this basically tells us that, basically we don't have a real federation in Catalonia. The Estado de Autonomía, it's not a real federation. And I'm using a colleague, Pablo Ramendi's definition of what federalism is, right? So federalism is a voluntary contract between equal parts. In a federation, when the parts give up sovereignty in exchange for a just political and economic system, and there are real forms of representation, among other things. This is a very obviously a simplification. But the basic points that can be made is that, in Spain, we have a constitutional court that excludes minorities. They're not real mechanisms of shared rule and coordination, and that they're not clear guarantees that the autonomy, for the autonomy of these communities, which is not, none of these basically would be characteristic of a federation. And it's partly that the reason why I'm pointing this out is this is part of the reason why we are where we are now. So the recent history of Catalonia. So in 2003, we have a new coalition government led by Pasqual Maragall, PSC leader, left-wing Socialist Party in Catalonia, coalition with Esquerra Republicana Catalunya, Left Wing Independents, and also Iniciativa per Catalunya Verds, the former communists that are not in the picture. But this picture, it's interesting. There was the Prime Minister of Spain, right, that was supporting this coalition, and what this coalition had in mind to do, which was to write a new statute for Catalonia. The idea of this new statute was somehow an intent to federalize the relationship with Spain. It was a way to try to put together and get to understand each other a bit better than we had done so far. This and Carlos might provide more details about this. But so the new statute was approved by 80% of the support of the Catalan parliament. That's a mistake. Sorry. Then it was renegotiated and subsequently softened in Madrid. They took out this concept that Catalonia is a nation, which was in the initial text of the statute. They took it out from the text, was put in the prologue of the statute. And basically, the way which the statute was softened, that basically the financial system, which was a big problem, right? And Carlos is also going to give details on this. Does not substantially change. Still, when the statute comes back to, so basically the procedure by which the statute gets reformed is, well, first it's approved in the Catalan parliament, it goes to Madrid, it gets approved in the Congress, it got approved with these changes. It came back to Catalonia to be approved in a referendum, and it's approved, and it's voted on a referendum approved by with a 73%, 24 of the vote. Okay, but then we have a new phase in the process. The new phase is that in July 2010, the Constitutional Court, to which the PP and some communities, autonomous communities, had appealed the statute, so the Constitutional Court makes a decision on the statute, and well, basically 14 articles are deemed unconstitutional. Some other articles are modified. With these reforms that the Constitutional Court makes to the statute, like all the existing mechanisms that reduce fiscal imbalances are taken out of the text. They show like a very much strict interpretation of the holder of national sovereignty. It says very clearly the interpretation that the Constitutional Court makes of the Constitution is such that there's no other nation in Spain than Spanish nation. And it also like implies some difficult interpretations between exclusive and shared competences, basically providing more grounds for central intervention, but it's also like a lot of ambiguities and uncertainties about the level of autonomy that Catalonia and other communities in Spain have. So basically it's a challenge for the idea of Spain being a federal state. Okay, so then what do we have? We have like the big event that starts this process that we're now observing now. So it's like the 10th of July demonstration. A lot of people on the streets, really angry about the Constitutional Court decision. And okay, so this like basically implies like a big boost in support for independence. In a way, people at that point of time feel betrayed about a democratic process by which the Catalan people had decided not to try to accommodate in Spain, had been betrayed, had been totally annihilated, and like people were like angry. And so this can be shown in this graph that I took from Palpatí Descobert. It's a blog from El Diari Ara, and they made this nice graph showing support for Catalan independent state, which is the red line that you see here, a long time, and also other forms of constitutional forms in Spain. So if we look at the red line, it's really interesting to observe the following. So we have like 15% support to Catalan independent state around 2006 when the statute is like voted on a referendum. We get like increasing support, not a big increase, but then we have like this period in which like this is a period in which in addition there are like votings and like kind of small referendums at the local level that are organized by social movements that are trying to say, like, vote for independence in our town. There are like a lot of consultants, like a lot of these small referendums taking place during this period in which, like, basically overlaps with the moment in which they were like the Constitutional Court was deliberating about the statute, and after the statute decision, we get like already quite an increase of support for Catalan independence thing, and see basically in this like in 2012, there's an amazing increase to this until like the last elections in the parliament. And here we have the 11, the 16, the September 11 demonstration of this past year. Okay, so about this, there's this idea that this increase in secessionism is only the consequence of the economic crisis. So this graph is by Francesca Matt, who posted in his blog. Basically, like, it provides nice evidence that, well, we have a period in which, well, this is percent support for secession using this data from the surveys, CIS surveys. So this is the CO surveys. So basically, we have a period in which there's no crisis, there's no court sentence of the statute. This is a period in which we have economic crisis, but the Constitutional Court has not made the decision yet. So we have I think we have an increase in support for secession, but not as much as this increase that we observe in this period in which we have both economic crisis and the sentence. So in a way, I mean, we don't have the counterfactual because unfortunately we don't have we don't have the counterfactual situation in which there's no crisis and there's only the sentence. But it's interesting evidence showing that there was a political crisis that preceded the economic crisis and that contributed to what is going on. I also want to make like a small point, like if we look, and I think that Jeff's probably going to show some evidence on national identities in Catalonia, we observe that they do not overlap with this increase in support for independence. So basically, national identities remain somewhat stable a long time. So the idea that the support for secession has to do with people that with this national identity, people like feeling only Catalan, people feel more Catalan, it doesn't really apply because there has not been a change in the sociological distribution of these people a long time. These identities have been very much stable. So this idea that the political crisis that basically showed that the accommodation with Spain was very difficult, and in combination with the posterior economic crisis, has been the one accounting for this support in secession, right? Increased support in secessionism, more than anything else that has to do with identities. Okay, so this is like evidence on the September 11 demonstration. And before finishing, I need to wrap up very, very fast. Just want to, show the recent events. We have these elections in November 12, right? Where basically we get a majority of secessionist parties in the parliament. We have evidence, very recent evidence, that there are like 74% of the people in Catalonia are in favor of the celebration of a referendum. And also recent polls showing, well, this is basically the results of the elections, like basically distributed by those that support independence or not. This is like the map of Catalonia. Blue is support for independence, so quite widespread support. And even within Barcelona, there's a big majority for a special majority for independence. So Barcelona usually thought as a place where there's no support for independence. In these recent elections, basically, political parties that are supporting independence are a majority in a lot of neighborhoods. So in the recent polls that February 2013, we get that they're like, if people were asked about, they asked people what would they vote in a referendum, 44% are in favor of independence, 20.7% say that they would vote against the referendum. So in a way, this is kind of supportive of the idea that, well, if there was a referendum, democratic referendum, there would be a big majority in favor of independence if people behave the way they respond to polls. Finally, there was this January, February, there were some recent events. The first of all, there was a declaration of sovereignty by the Parliament Catalonia, basically stating that Catalonia has the right to vote about the territorial status. And a similar resolution was approved in the Spanish Congress in defense of the right to decide. So in a way, in defense of that there can be a referendum in Catalonia to decide about the political status of the region. And 35 representatives from Catalonia, like so more than 75% of them vote in favor, 12 voting against. So just to wrap up, seems like, well, so there's an increasing secessionist trend in Catalonia that has to do with political and economic discontent. I believe that there might be some things that have to do the reason why, on the constitutional design flaws in Spain that left many things open that in a way like the territorial issues were unresolved and left ambiguous. It must also be noted that Spain didn't have like a proper transitional justice during the transition. This also has led to discontentment among the minorities in the country. And I also want to emphasize that to finish that very often people think that this is like a movement that is led by the political elites and that basically, elites are manipulating the public. In Catalonia, we observe a powerful social movement, that is organizing these peaceful demonstrations, July and September 11, that is organizing these local level referendums to promote the change in the status quo. So, to me, this kind of hypothesis that these are like ethnic elites trying to mobilize, they don't really apply. I mean, I see that there's a civic bottom-up movement, and it's driving the agenda. And I think that's why we are here. It's not because there are like some interested politicians trying to mobilize a particular issue. And obviously, as in any country, in any region, politicians try to mobilize voters in their favor. That's not in Catalonia, everywhere. But I want to emphasize the point that there's this social movement that is really powerful in Catalonia. And that's all I had to say.
Thank you very much, Laia.
So thank you so much for inviting me to this roundtable. I'll try to move fast over these slides, since I know that Sebastian is very kind of likes to be a central banker of the German type, more than Federal Reserve. So I'll try to comply with instructions. So basically, I think that in a way, this talk is complementary to Laia's talk in a way, and perhaps moving forward in other things. The plan of the talk is to talk a bit about why in the long run, then go into today's why, which I think is slightly different, or perhaps very different from the past, and then the how, right? If this is true, if there is indeed this majority and the political class has to follow it, then how is this going to happen? And of course, this is a very difficult and complex thing. So I'll sort of kind of be I'll sketch things here, and we can talk about them. So basically, to go into the why, the historical why, I think that Catalanism has an old tradition. Catalans have this separate national identity that is grounded on language, on culture, and also, and I think sometimes we forget about this, the historical memory of the government institutions, sort of representative institutions with rights that were abolished in 1714, and then that have been in parts and only from time to time re-established in the 20th century. So there is this this sort of body of this tradition that comes from far. When you look at history, just after the fall of absolutism in the 30s and the 40s, the fall of a regime that I think is the equivalent of Assad's regime in Syria. There were already several attempts at resolving this question in different ways, right? From the left, the Federalist Republican tradition, which is one from which the tripartite coalition drank very directly, and people, I think, forget about this, an attempt to use new forms of thought imported from the US, imported from Europe to solve this problem, republicanism. And then from the right, basically within the dynastic parties, and mostly through lobbies that had to do with civil law and tariffs and things like that. This changed in the turn of the 20th century very much as it happened in the rest of Europe, you have the crystallization, the formation of modern mass parties in Europe. That's the same thing in Catalonia. That coincides with the Cuban crisis. So the moment of weakness in Spain leads to this formation of these new parties, also related with a concept of regeneration. So this kind of cleaning the old elites. And also in part, and I think we forget about this, sometimes responding to the fact that Spain was becoming a stronger state. For example, when basically at the turn of the century, when phones are introduced, the Spanish state forbids Catalans from talking in Catalan in private phone conversations. The catechesis was also forbidden in Catalan, things like that, right? With kind of mixed success, since the church basically defended the idea of instructing kids in their language. At this time, this crystallization that takes the form of different parties has as its main goals basically defense of language, culture, and some regional autonomy with some administrative and fiscal capacity. That's not very different from the programmatic goals of the Czech parties, for example. The Czechs were basically, there were lots of parties in the Czech parliament before 1914, all of them divided on all kinds of questions for demanding some sort of autonomy within a federation. The only two MPs that were against that in the parliament were the two members of the so-called realist party, not because they were royalists, because they were pragmatists. They thought that federation in Austria could not be possible. When the war came, they were exiled, or they exiled themselves to Paris, and they constituted a national council of the Czechs abroad that was then used by the US when at the end of the 1918, the war, and they were Benes and Masaryk. So the only two that were against federation, because they thought it was too much, became the president and the prime minister of Czechoslovakia. So very strange, very much like Catalonia, very strange. What is the balance of these? Well, partial victories in some administrative autonomy in 1912, political autonomy in 1931-32, and then again political autonomy with the transition to democracy, but setbacks. The setbacks of the dictatorship of Primo de Rivera, the Civil War, and then a different type of setback, which is what Laia was talking about. So what about today? I think that there is this continuity, but there have been changes, and I think that this has in a way changed the way things are seen in Catalonia. And I think that this is related, at least I hypothesize, it's related to what I think people feel there are three deficits in the relationship with Spain, the Spanish state. The first deficit is basically one that we call democratic deficit. So it's that people think of the situation as not having enough autonomy, right? The second one is a constitutional deficit, in fact. It's a lack of political guarantees, and Laia talked about this a bit. The final one is a fiscal deficit that is a kind of a measure of discrimination, of discriminatory treatment. I think that at least this is what Catalan citizens feel. What about the democratic deficit? Well, basically at this point, 80% of Catalans demand full fiscal autonomy, which basically means collection of taxes and then some negotiation with the central government on common services. So the Basque solution, that's something that has a lot of consensus behind. And only 25% accept the current political status or are even willing to reduce autonomy, which is really tiny, it's like 5%. What about the constitutional deficit? Well, basically, I think that constitutional agreements, democracies, are based on the idea of mutual guarantees. So it's impossible to sustain a democracy where you do not feel the possibility of affecting outcomes. It's what basically we call taking turns in government. So, if I know that I'm going to be always in the minority, it's going to be difficult for me to accept the possibility of living together with others, unless they are angels, and no one is an angel, frankly, in the world. And taking turns, what the Greeks thought as the way in which democracy should be thought, it could be through representation, it could be through lotteries, it really doesn't matter. That's at the heart of democracy. And the problem is that Catalonia has, perhaps by design, become a permanent national minority. It is, except in situations where there are minority governments in Madrid, its capacity to impact policy, its it's kind of very diminished for all kinds of reasons, basically being a minority and having this ideological drive that pushes them into the corner at some point. When you have these situations, then there are solutions, of course. And I think that the solution is, if taking turns in government is not possible, being part of coalitions that change, then you, normally a constitutional designer, a constitutional engineer, in the terms of Giovanni Sartori, would basically use written guarantees. That's what the Statute of 2006 tried. It was amended by the Spanish Congress and then basically completely changed by the Constitutional Court. So that at this point, the majority can reinterpret the Constitution to its advantage, right? Ludicrous example to the, perhaps wasting minutes here, is the bullfighting law, right? So Catalonia has, or in principle in the statute, has the capacity to decide on questions that are related to entertainment and sports and things like that, passes a law banning bullfighting. And then the Spanish government now has decided to, or is considering the reintroduction of bullfighting by changing the concept of bullfighting as something that is of national interest. And so because it's of national interest, there is an article in the Constitution that allows the government to then rule on that, right? So this is a system that has very few guarantees, right? It's the same thing for education and many other things, and I have no time to talk about. So what about the third deficit, the fiscal deficit? I think it's important, very important, as Americans knew in 1775. But also it's a kind of a way of measuring things. And in that sense, I think it's interesting. Basically, the system in Spain is intricate, but works as having a unified taxation system with some taxes that are given to devolve to the regions, but then with a very strongly skewed funding system because of progressivity, but other things too. The formula is not just income. This leads to a huge imbalance. This is from 2002 to 2005. The red columns are the payments of Catalonia, the citizens of Catalonia and companies of Catalonia, to the central government as a percentage of the Catalan GDP, around basically 30%, 28. And then the green columns are the payments, both of the regional government, expenditure, regional government, central government, social security system. And the blue bar, it's a negative number, is basically the difference. Difference is about 8 to basically 8%. So every year, about 16 billion euros have been transferred since the beginning of democracy from Catalonia to the central government. Now, this is important because at the same time you have this unified tax system and a skewed spending structure. Most very fundamental services in Spain have been transferred to all regions, basically mainly education and health. Not just that, but those are the main. So regions have the obligation of serving citizens on these two counts. And so when you look at what happens, basically, this is a table where I look at show the regional spending for all the things that are common to these regions. And basically, it's health and education. This is the spending in euros per person in 2011. These are data from the Ministry of Finance, the Spanish Ministry of Economics and Finance. Navarra is the first one. It has a spending capacity of about 6,500 euros per person. As a percent of GDP, 21.9% of GDP of Navarra's GDP. Catalonia is 13. It has a spending capacity of 3,000 euros. If you So there is a big difference between the biggest spenders, the four autonomies, but also a set of autonomies in the south and west of Spain, and then the rest. If you look at the spending as percentage of GDP of each region, Catalonia is ranked 16th, right, out of 17 regions. So there is enormous difference in spending capacity, but you have to basically fund the same services, and that's a problem. Discounted. I mean, 1 minute. Yeah, it is true. Madrid is also at the bottom. So this is, so the interesting thing to me is not just nominal terms, which is what I'm showing, but real spending, right? Because, for example, let me take these. This is per capita this is public health in Europe using OECD data. This is per capita income in 2006 in dollars. This is public spending in health per person in 2006 in dollars. These are these different countries in Europe, again, using OECD data. Correlation is extremely strong, it's kind of income elasticity here is fundamental. The poor spend less than the rich. When you put in spending in Catalonia, well, it's really, an outlier as a result of this skewness, right? So it's about, it should be in the order of 2,200, it's 1,500. That's a lot, a big difference, right? That's why public satisfaction is so low. You take there is this big survey, 1 minute. I'm going to borrow a couple of minutes from somewhere, Draghi or something like that. Sophia is going to be the Draghi. Right?
I didn't follow that.
It's all right. It's all right. So I'm looking at satisfaction of survey people by region in Europe done by the General Direction of Regions, the DGR, in the late 2009. They are asked, these people in different regions in all Europe, I have all the data for Europe, how satisfied they are with public health system, and then I plug this against per capita income, per capita euros spent in public health, adjusted to parity prices. This is, I think, important. Well, not surprisingly, the degree of satisfaction is positively correlated, strongly positively correlated with public health. I see here already Mamman and so on. Anyway, so I'm just trying to explain why people are unhappy. I'm not using the public health care system in Catalonia. So. There is another component to this, is that if you naturally have obligations to fund your citizens, but you have less money that you need, you have to borrow. There is no other way. I mean, you can go bankrupt. You can say, oh, you forget it. You take it and you do it. So you borrow, and it's not as strange that the fiscal balance, meaning the difference between what is paid and what is received in terms of expenditure, for each autonomous community in Spain and regional public debt in 2006, they are negatively correlated, right? So those that are net payers, the Balearic Islands, Catalonia, Valencia, have huge debts, whereas others don't. The guys here, of course, they are virtuous because they have plenty of money. There are some that have plenty of money and behave outrageously, like Castilla-La Mancha. But you'll have to, talk to Hospital to understand why this is the case. In any case, this is terrible for Spain because it means that because the system is so skewed, then you have tons of debt that are putting in danger the whole state. So it's inefficient. So it's politically unfair, I think, but economically it's terribly inefficient. Infrastructures, the story is not that different. This is the story of Madrid compared the construction of highways. Highways here have to be paid by those that use them, not in Madrid. This is 1993. This is 2007. No change here, tremendous change. Population hasn't changed. Something is strange going on, I think. In this context, what happens is people are unhappy, guarantees are not given, and the world has changed. This is the evolution of the number of states in the world, and this is average trade openness in the last 50 years. Globalization opens up things, and I think that's what is behind. So external constraints that were so important have disappeared. Now, the Catalans are very quickly here, and I'm sure that we are going to talk about this. In the how, and promise it's 2 minutes, are very interested in following, at least this is what I understand from what I read, interested in following international parameters, in the sense that they take seriously the position of the court, the International Court of Justice, where, of course, right of self-determination is not legal in the sense that there is a procedure, but it's not unlawful, and there is an opinion in Kosovo of 2010. The second thing is that the idea is that the process should be democratic, at least in the debates that are going on in Catalonia, and there is a Canadian jurisprudence on that regard, and of course the British-Scottish agreement on the Scotland's referendum, the same day that the UK Parliament voted in favor of holding a referendum for Scotland, the Spanish Parliament did say no. And how is this going to happen? Well, I think there are 3 steps, if indeed it happens. One is some declaration of sovereignty to start the process, a process of information and deliberation, since this should be a democratic process, and then the democratic decision. The declaration of sovereignty, as Laia said, took place in January 23rd, 2013. There should be some information and deliberation. Politicians, just following this social movement thing, are promising a National Council of Transition and an experts committee to advise on these issues. And then the question is democratic decision. I think this is a function of Spain's position. Spain can go repressive, cooperative, or adversarial. Repressive, I think, is difficult. This is what used to happen in the 19th century, or even before. This is a bombing of Barcelona in the 1940s from Montjuic. And we thought, but this seems not to be the case. The Peces Barba, who died last year, or 2 years ago, or sorry, last year, in October 27, 2011, said, well, in 1640, we made a decision. The decision was made to let the Portuguese go while we kept the Catalans. Of course, he said, what would have happened? We don't know. Perhaps we would have been better off. What we are certain about is that we have had to bomb Barcelona so many times, right? And he then said later, well, this time everything will be solved without having to bomb anyone. So I take seriously what the father of the 1978 Constitution said, and I suppose that the repressive response is not going to happen. Cooperative, adversarial, there are 4 possibilities. Referendum, nothing says in the Constitution that a referendum is not possible. The Spanish Constitution allows a referendum in Article 92 with the authorization of the Spanish government. Can be done for local or regional territories according to the law of January of 1980 that developed the referendum. If that's not possible because the Spanish government doesn't allow it, of course the Catalan government could go to the Constitutional Court, although the Constitutional Court credibility is low. And so the second possibility is a popular consultation, which is a referendum that is something that exists in the Statute of 2006 and requires its regulation through a law that is starting to be written in Catalonia as we speak. If the popular consultation is somehow invalidated by the Spanish government, plebiscitarian elections are a possibility. If the plebiscitarian elections are not allowed because the Senate in Spain decides to abolish the Catalan autonomy, which it can do according to the Spanish Constitution, there is always a declaration in the parliament, in situ, right? So those are the possibilities, and we don't know, but that's how it looks like. Thank you so much.
All right, well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here to speak on this issue. I'm going to give a perspective on things that's a bit different from the one you've heard so far. But let me begin by saying I do think that we can all agree on a few things. That one thing is that the Catalan case is a very interesting case of nationalist mobilization in a democratic context in which, unlike in the Basque Country, for example, there's not been any violence or very little violence, let's say. And so in many respects, the way in which nationalist politics play themselves out in this democratic context is one that we can all learn from. And in fact, the Catalan nationalist movement has been strikingly successful since the transition to democracy in obtaining a lot of its goals under the federal framework or quasi-federal framework of the Spanish Constitution, and it's done so despite the fact that in a comparative perspective, it encounters what we can say many obstacles that are not political or constitutional in nature, but so much as they are demographic, let's say, in a comparative perspective, because most nationalist movements that strive for some sort of independence or regional autonomy from a central state do so in a comparative perspective on the basis of an ethnic sort of strong core of social base of support. And the Catalan context is one in which, if we can say that Spain is multinational and very plural, so too is Catalonia a very plural place, something that makes the success of the Catalan nationalist movement all the more striking. So if we look at the ethno-linguistic diversity in Catalonia, we see that in fact only about 63% of the population was born in Catalonia. Right now, as of after the last 10 to 15 years, in fact, 17.5% of the population born outside of Spain. These are data coming from the Generalitat, and 19.4% born in the rest of the country. And many of the people born in Catalonia are children of these born in the rest of the country. So if we break it down by immigrants, first generations, mixed, and second generation, in fact, second generation Catalans, people whose parents were born in Catalonia and they themselves also born in Catalonia, are in fact a distinct minority in the population. Only about 40% of the population. If we look at the first language spoken in Catalonia, again using data from the Generalitat, the people who speak Catalan as their first language, again, is a distinct minority in Catalonia itself. So the successes that they've had on the cultural front with respect to language policy and with respect to hegemony at the political level are in fact quite impressive. Now, so just to push this point forward even further, if we look at the most common surnames in Catalonia, this is something that you won't suspect, perhaps. In fact, the most common surnames, the top 20, are all Spanish surnames if we're going to think about it in a kind of ethnic way. And so, again, this is something that is a clear, we can say, a demographic problem, has been a demographic problem for the nationalist movement, something that Jordi Pujol himself was very aware of back in the 1960s, and the nationalist movement has been very firm in its efforts to integrate, if not assimilate, portions of these migrants, children of migrants from the rest of the country, largely from the south of the country that came to occupy working class positions in Catalonia's social structure into the body politic, if you will. However, with some success, clearly some success, but limited success. And we can see, for example, if we compare these last names, which are the most common last names in Catalonia, to the last names of the people involved in this civic association, the Assemblea Nacional de Catalunya, that convoked this the Diada demonstration in September of 2012. So if we just look at a comparison between these names and these names, we see that nevertheless, even though they've integrated somewhat, we see a very big disjuncture between what this social movement is, or the bases of support, core basis of support for people leading this social movement, if you will, and then also in the basis of support, we can look later at this more generally. The nationalist movement continues to be, in a certain respect, what we can say, only part of Catalonia. So this is a first way of thinking about this divide. Okay. So when we look forward, let's look more about this issue. And this is an issue when we're thinking about a referendum which people are talking about, and people talking about mentioning the Canadian reference, and the Canadian reference talks about having a clear majority on a clear question. These are difficulties with respect to the clear majority, forging this clear majority. Now, when we ask people this national identity question, and this national identity question is not exactly the same as people's preferences for territorial autonomy, but as we'll see, they're correlated. When we ask people whether or not they identify themselves as only Spanish, more Spanish as Catalan, more Catalan, or only Catalan, what we see, and this is something we've been tracking since the 1970s, in fact, in almost every single survey, the plurality, and up until recently, the overwhelming majority was feeling as Spanish as Catalan. And what we've seen is major transformations, particularly in the last 2 to 4 years, in which we're seeing higher percentages, about 10 to 15% more than used to, feeling predominantly Catalan or only Catalan. But when we look at this by different segments of the population, we see that amongst the immigrants themselves, people born outside of the region, only 4.2% identify themselves as only Catalan. And we compare this to second-generation Catalans, we have 45.6% and 31.4% more. So an overwhelming majority of these native Catalans who are feeling predominantly or even exclusively Catalan. Now, interestingly, the first-generation Catalans, we see they're like their parents insofar as they feel as Spanish as Catalan, but they're different from their parents because there's a good percentage of them, let's say about a third of them, that identify themselves as predominantly, although very few who identify themselves as only Catalan. And these people are largely, when we look at this, these are upwardly mobile people. But nevertheless, the majority of them remain like their parents, identifying themselves equally with Spain and with Catalonia. Interestingly are the mixed ones, who are only 15% of the population, but they are much more likely to take on an only Catalan identity. Now, for first language groups, so this is obviously very much correlated with language as well, since the migrants come from the rest of the country, their first language is Spanish. As we saw, the majority of the population has its first language as Spanish. Again, among those whose first language is Spanish, people who feel only Catalan, it's a very small minority. And even though you do have about 1 in 5 that feel predominantly Catalan. Now, nevertheless, amongst Catalan-speaking population, it's an overwhelming majority. So this is the core base of support, if you will, for the nationalist movement in Catalonia. And so that's a first thing to understand, is that Catalonia doesn't speak with a homogenous voice on these issues, but in fact it's relatively divided, if not in a necessarily conflictual way. It's divided in ways that have to do with ethnic background. But it also has to do with the way in which this ethnic diversity is associated with the social structure of Catalonia. As I already mentioned, that most of these migrants and their children come from the south of Spain to occupy working class space in the Catalan public. And so what you see is a very strong correlation between, let's say, the class position or occupation we're using here, and the percentage of people who feel predominantly Catalan identities. So amongst liberal professionals, we have 54.7% feeling predominantly Catalan, going down to the blue-collared industrial low-level service workers, only 20.9%. So one of the stories, yes, it's the story of popular mobilization. It is in civic society, but it's not something to talk about it being from the bottom up as if it was coming from the lower segments of Catalan society. I think that's a misnomer, we say, so to speak about it sociologically. And it does explain something about why, despite the fact that it's only a minority of the population that feels these ways, that feels this way, this strong Catalan identity, it nevertheless has a disproportional say, let's say, in the way in which the region speaks politically. So this is something that we see in other places as well, that the dominant segments of the materially advantaged segments of society tend to have a disproportionate voice, if you will. Now, this is something that Laia spoke to as well. When we look at the support for independence, I'd like to show that, yes, I do agree with her. There's been a massive increase in support in the last 2 years for support for independence. So in favor versus abstention, we've seen these already. But I think this shows that, in fact, as well, if we look at, so this is just looking at the last few years, but in fact there's also data going back to the time of the transition to democracy, and consistently the percentage of people who are in favor of independence has been a minority, and so this is a very new kind of a majority that's percolating. And so it's something that should give people pause to think about whether or not it's clear that this majority is going to remain. But also when people talk, when we go back to the Canadian reference, people talk about a clear majority, and they also talk about one sustainable over time. So if we were to talk about what the democratic opinion has been in Catalonia in the times in the transition to democracy, this is a very new phenomenon, so it's not clear. And because Spain is in such crisis, things are developing and evolving very rapidly. It's not clear that this is going to be continued. But it is nevertheless very surprising and in many respects, and it's a very strong change. So how does this change affect? How does this change look when we look at by language groups? So we see basically, if we go back to 2010 and we ask people, now we're looking not at their identities but their preferences for independence, we see back in 2010, 42.7% of the Catalan speakers versus only 10.2% of the Castilian speakers wanted a right for independence. And this has changed dramatically by 2012, where now it's overwhelmingly 2 out of 3 Catalan speakers wanting independence. And interestingly, there's been an increase of about 10%, but not near as much as the increase in the Catalan speakers. And they remain those who want independence amongst Castilian speakers, who again are a majority of the population, a clear and distinct minority of the Castilian speakers. Now, so with respect to this question about where this is coming from, is this coming from below or is this coming from above, whether or not the political elite are representing the Catalan population, we have data on the political elite, and this is data that has been both I've collected in the past and also working with Xavier Collet, Enrique Martinez, among others, a big group of people on looking at the members of parliament throughout Spain. What we see is a clear disjuncture between the opinions of the Catalan elite and the opinions of the Catalan public. Now, so if we go back to the early 2000s, over two-thirds, almost 70% of the Catalan members of parliament, this is a representative sample of Catalan parliamentarians, identified themselves as exclusively Catalan, very much more than the public itself. When we move forward to 2010, we see that the elites have become more Catalanized, if you will. The population too, but the population being dragged behind the elites, if you will, so to speak. So this is something that, again, I don't dispute Laia's claim that there's clear roots in a broader civil society as well, associated around the nationalist movement, but the organic links between the political class and this nationalist movement are not to be underestimated. Now, when we look at, for example, so we look at the preferred forms of state, political elites versus electoral constituencies, we see, again, similarly, we see the elites being much more in favor of the right to independence overall. And then we see major changes in the electorate, but they still lag behind the elites. And this is true at the level of all the elites. It's also true for every single party. From the vast majority of the party. Even Convergencia's constituency, interestingly, back in 2010, only 27.1% of them wanted independence, and this then by 2012 had changed dramatically, so the elites are sort of educating the public on this, and so we could look at this across the board. Now, interestingly, this is the last point I'll make about public opinion, social bases of support. So we've seen this radical transformation of public opinion in Catalonia. At the same time, we've seen a transformation at the level of all of Spain. So in terms of whereas more and more people want the right for independence in all of Spain, more and more people in the rest of Spain want re-centralization. So there's a kind of dialectic, if you will, of centrifugal and centripetal pressures going on here. So it's not so in the backdrop of this political story that Laia tells and the economic story that we know about, we're seeing both sides are kind of polarizing here on this issue. So let's turn to, and I know I have a brief amount of time here, but maybe I'm going to have to borrow from Draghi just a couple of minutes as well, using the precedent. So let's talk. I want to turn to talk about, just for a few minutes, what I think are the issues at stake from the standpoint of democratic theory, if you will, and the question of collective self-determination, whether or not, what kind of right this is, because in Catalan political life and in Spanish political life more generally, this issue is on the board. The Catalan parliament has recently declared sovereignty for the Catalan nation, and that for reasons of democratic legitimacy, that they are sovereign and they have this right. This is in the electoral manifesto of Convergencia y Unión, Wilson initiative as well, people talking about this right, nations having this right to self-determination, and that this is about democracy. So there's this strong link between the right to self-determination and democracy. So I have a few things to say about this. To begin with, let's say, in historically and in the present, opinions are very divided on this question. So it's not like there's a clear unanimous position with respect to what this right entails, whether or not it exists. Wilson, of course, famously claimed that all peoples have this right. But then, as Ivor Jennings pointed out also equally famously, is that this may seem reasonable on the surface, let the people decide. But in fact, it's ridiculous because the people can't decide until someone decides who are the people. So this is an issue having to do with whether or not this issue of the demos question, if you will, is something that there's a clear democratic answer to it. Now, some people go in the way that many neoliberals go, like von Mises, saying that any territorial group in which you have a majority. If you have a majority in favor, that this majority is going to, the democratic rule, the democratic way to go is to give any majority, even if it's a neighborhood, to give them this self-determination. Now, the United Nations, of course, does not go with this idea. They say that self-determination is a right that belongs to colonized peoples. And basically the prevailing opinion among international legal scholars is, again, this is something that applies to colonies. It's not something that applies in situations where you have democratic representative institutions in play. And so, and we think about in the American case, right, the Declaration of Independence. So people talk about Wilson, but what about our founding fathers here? Well, what the founding fathers, if you read the Declaration of Independence, what they say is when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, convinced and designed to reduce them under absolute despotism, this is when you have the right. So it's a basic idea that it's a right that kicks in when your fundamental rights are being trampled on. So this idea of self-determination, in the literature, most people think about it in this way. It's a remedial right. Okay? Now, so then we turn and we look at this. So are the Catalans having their fundamental rights trampled on? So do they lack meaningful self-government? We've talked about the Spanish Constitution. I do disagree with Carlos and Laia with respect to how limited the Constitution is. I think Article 2 of the Constitution, it does say it's based on the indissoluble unity of the Spanish nation, but it also says that it recognizes and guarantees the right to self-government of the nationalities and regions of which it is composed. It also recognizes in Article 3 that the other Spanish languages shall also be official in the respective self-governing communities, and that the richness of the different linguistic modalities of Spain is a cultural heritage. So you get symbolic recognition, linguistic multilingualism enshrined in the Constitution, as well as the statutes of autonomy are protected by the Constitution. So you have, in a comparative perspective, we want to look back to the British case. The British case, the self-governing institutions in Northern Ireland, for example, were abolished at will several times, something that couldn't happen in the Spanish case. So we have clear constitutional protections. Now, with respect to expenditures, so Carlos talked a lot about the injustices at the level of expenditures. Spain, in a European perspective, has lots of decentralized government, so it's one of the most decentralized in terms of the proportion of spending that goes on at the regional level. In the level of the OECD, it's also, and between 2000 and 2009, this period that apparently has this great re-centralization going on, Spain is becoming one of the most decentralized in terms of expenditures. So what's going on here? Yes, there are economic grievances and grievances that Carlos is talking about, but it's really important to keep in mind that Catalonia is a rich region in the country, and so a lot of what's going on has to do with redistribution between rich regions and poor regions. And so as this guy pointed out, he noticed that Madrid was on the bottom, so it's not only something that's happening to the Catalans. The Balearic Islands are getting targeted as well, the rich ones. So Madrid, except for the Basque Country, which has a special deal. Okay, and so this is really what's going on behind a lot of this. But if we look between 1973 and 2010, we see the Catalans, this is 100% being the average in Spain. The Catalans started at 120% disposable household income, going down to about 115 in 2010. So this is hardly the stuff of economic oppression. This is a rich region. Anyone who's been to Spain knows this. But nevertheless, there is a story, and this is a story that has a certain kind of political purchase and gets demagogically used in time of economic crisis. So Spain is robbing us. Spain is robbing us. And here we have an even more demagogic use of this idea where you have a picture of Spain there doing bad things to Catalonia and speaking in the Andalus accent there, by the way. Nevertheless, and to put it, Artur Mas, the president of the Generalitat, he put it this way when he was talking to a bunch of Americans back last year in June. Catalonia has lost opportunities. It is like an athlete forced to compete with a sack full of rocks in his back. Catalonia gives much more to the state than it receives, and has so for decades. This situation has become a serious burden hindering our economic competitiveness. And this is a story that I think is a story that's really important. It's a story that it's easy to get people to believe. It's a populist story, and it's taking place at a time of massive economic crisis, and it's something that is not only being told with success in Catalonia. So it's very similar to what happens in Padania. So here's con la Lega Norte contra Roba, ladrona, which España nos roba. Or in Belgium, in Flanders. Belgium is a transfer union in which the Flemish democracy contributes more than its fair share to the federation. Bart de Wever, leader of the Neo-Flemish Alliance and mayor of Antwerp. So we see this is a kind of, if it was something that was so particular to Catalonia, we wouldn't be seeing it in the nationalist registers across a variety of different contexts. Now, last couple of points. One, so on this question, are the Catalans ruled despotically? They have meaningful self-government. They're not economically oppressed. Is the Constitution a straitjacket? No. The Constitution allows for a referendum, something that Carlos himself admitted. Article 92 of the Constitution allows for the central government to call for a referendum. Now, the issue is at stake is that the Catalan parliament is saying that they have a unilateral right to call a referendum to secede, and that signifies a break with the constitutional order, and that's something that they don't have a right to do in terms of constitutional law, and I think Ignacio will have things to say about what the international community would have to say about that. But nevertheless, even any part of the Constitution, and some constitutions, like the German Constitution, say that there are certain parts of the Constitution that can't be changed. Section 168 of the Constitution explicitly says that if you get the proper majorities, and they're proper majorities that are possible. They're possible in part because, one, unlike what Carlos said, the Catalan nationalists frequently have a very important power in determining who governs in the center. Between 1993 and 2000, they did so, and between 2004 and 2010 again, they did so. And so quite frequently, they're a kingmaker in Spanish politics. And also, the Spanish Socialist Party itself is divided on these questions. So it would be difficult, but it would be possible to change Article 2 even. So this is something that can be done democratically through the Constitution. Another issue is having to do a plebiscitarian decree that would be anti-constitutional. Now, with respect to, and this is the very last point, with respect to the democratic rights. So on the question of democracy, so we have this issue of constitutional democracy, but on the question of democracy, do the Catalans have a democratic right to unilaterally secede? The most basic of democratic intuitions that anyone whose interests are affected by decision should have a voice in the making of that decision. And this principle, I think, speaks directly against the unilateral right to secede, since such a cession would clearly affect the interests of the citizens of the rest of Spain, as well as the rest of the European Union, not only people in Catalonia. So if the Spanish government would decide to use its constitutionally vested power to convoke a referendum, there's a strong democratic argument that the entirety of the Spanish people should be consulted, at least at one point. Maybe not at the first moment, but at least at one point. And so this is an issue, again, that is in accordance, I think, not only with constitutional precedents of people like the Canadian Constitutional Court, but also democratic theory. So I think with that, we've got enough on the table.
So, good afternoon. Thank you very much to Sebastian and Sofia, to the Iberian Study Group for inviting me. I'm very happy to be back at the Center for Iberian Studies. Well, in order to leave some time for discussing, I'll try to be very brief. I'm afraid I haven't cartoons or not even figures. I'm not going to talk about bullfighting, but a much more technical dimension of the problem, but also with a very, very important relevance from a political point of view. It has to do with the complex relation between the Catalan bid for independence and the prospect of EU membership of a new state. And this is a parallel process in Scotland and Catalonia, so I will refer to both cases. There is a complex relation between the rise of regional separatism in Europe and the EU integration process. On the one hand, the existence of the European Union promotes regional separatism. And the narrative of the Catalan regional government or the Scottish regional government is that independence brings the best of two worlds, because you will have full national sovereignty at the same time within an attractive, wide economic and political space, which is the European Union. So you have access to the internal market. You are part of a political arena which may co-shape globalization and so on. Actually, as Laia had mentioned, the slogan of the massive demonstration last September in Barcelona was Catalonia, new state in Europe, Also the motto of the Scottish National Party in the last year has been independence in Europe. So on the one hand, in European Union is promoting this because, well, you can become independent at the same time connected to the wider world. But, well, on the other hand, the European Union, considering its rigid rules on enlargement, paradoxically is also an obstacle. And this comes the narrative of the British and Spanish government in the last month on that. So the idea is that autonomy is which brings the best of the three worlds. In this case, the three worlds, because you have, thanks to the autonomy within Britain or Spain, and as a member of the European Union, you have ambitious regional self-government without the trauma of the secession within, well, the European Union as well. Because if you leave, if you become independent, you are out of the European Union. So that's why for Catalonia and Scotland, for the Catalan and the Scottish nationalist parties, so important to demonstrate or trying to make the case for the entitlement for an automatic EU membership. It becomes crucial also because according to the polls, when you ask people in Catalonia or ask people in Scotland if they are in favor of independence, and the other speaker have shown result of opinion polls, if the question is, in case Catalonia becomes independent and leaves the European Union, what do you think? So the support to independence falls dramatically. There are three different scenarios supporting the idea that Catalonia or Scotland may be entitled for an automatic EU membership. The first one is succession of states. This is rather Scottish interpretation, has to do also with the constitutional history of the United Kingdom, the union of England and Scotland in the 18th century. The idea would be that if Scotland or Catalonia, because some Catalan lawyers and some Catalan political scientists have also supported this interpretation, both states, both successors, would be of equal legitimacy and both inherit the rights and can claim to the continuation of the different international treaties and international rights and duties of the predecessor state. Well, this scenario is not. You may think that in that case, Scotland may become a permanent member of the Security Council of United Nations. And the idea is that according to international law, it doesn't make sense. The second one is state dissolution. So it would be that in case Scotland and Catalonia becomes independent, Spain and the United Kingdom become extinct because the state have disappeared. And also, well, the international law precedents show that is not the case. And the third one is probably, well, the most reasonable is the idea that here in the European Union, international law doesn't apply, that the European Union is a sui generis organization, is closer to federal polity, and it has to be recognized that this has been developed by Catalan scholar and makes much more sense than the two first interpretation. So which is the internal enlargement scenario means? Internal enlargement means the European Union enlarged from within, with once Scotland or Catalonia becomes independent. The first one is that EU law doesn't regulate a secession. There is no precedent, so it's not forbidden. Second one, Catalonia or Scotland is already a part of the European Union. So Catalonia already fulfills the criteria, the Copenhagen criteria, so in the case of acquis communautaire, that means the respect of European Union primary and secondary law, so wouldn't be necessary a new process of negotiation on that. The third one is Catalonia and Catalan people doesn't want to leave the European Union. Is already part of the European Union and doesn't want to leave. And the fourth one, that the European Union citizen status will protect Catalan citizens, Catalan companies, Catalan residents located in Catalonia. There is a status, a new status protected by European Court of Justice. And finally, this is the idea that the European Union institutions and most member states, if not all member states except for Spain, would be very keen to keep Catalonia within the European Union because it's an organization expansioning. Well, the truth is that this is a strong case for that. But the problem is that European Union law does regulate how to become a member. It's not true that it's not regulated. And it's very, very well regulated. And actually, there are two formal answers by the two last president of the European Commission, Romani Prodi in 2004 and Jose Manuel Barroso last December, on that. And it shows very clearly, and the Commission as the Commission as the institution in his role of protecting the treaties and the European Union law, that when a part of the territory of member states leave that state, because become an independent state, cease to be a part of the European Union. This is the last one from President Barroso, is a letter to the United Kingdom House of Lords asking explicitly on Scotland. Well, there is, looking to the treaties, there is no possibility of automatic EU membership. Because, well, the European Union has been established by the member states explicitly. The treaty named the 27 member states. The treaties apply to them explicitly. They are listed, the number of MPs in the European Parliament, and the number of voters in different institutions. So any European state, and the treaty says, any European state which respect the Copenhagen criteria may apply to become a member of the Union, but you have to negotiate that accession. There's no right, there's no automatic entitlement. Actually, a state member of, and this is regulated by the treaty, a state going out of the European Union, if that state wants to apply for rejoining, for a new accession, have to negotiate again without taking any shortcut. An application of this type would be painstaking. I'm quoting this adjective because the Minister for European Affairs of Ireland, probably one of the best friends of Scotland, the minister has said that in case of the Scotland negotiation would be painstaking, exactly the same as is happening with Iceland. And this agreement is subject to unanimous ratification by all member states, including UK, the RAMP UK, including Spain. And there is even an additional regulation in the Lisbon Treaty. It's a sentence which was added upon Spanish request, by the way. It also shows that Spain is worried about on that a message in favor of the protection of the EU member state integrity from a legal point of view. Okay. However, a fast-track accession may be feasible, not from a legal, no entitlement, but from practical reasons, for political reasons, where there are Catalan 7 million people having been members of the European Union for 25 years, that have acquired, as I said, rights as a European citizen. For practical reasons, they couldn't be asked to leave the European Union and apply for readmission. And there is the possibility to negotiate membership simultaneously in the period between a yes result in a referendum and the planned date of independence. So, and the European Union would adopt a simplified accession procedure. So, for politically, but, and this is crucial, it depends on political willingness. There is no legal entitlement. It's not inconceivable that for Scotland or Catalonia to become EU members automatically, but the relevant EU and all member states might be willing to adjust the requirement for membership, so it's a political decision for them. Well, in my opinion, and in the opinion of most analysts, in case of Scotland, there are relatively high prospects for Scotland to enjoy this simultaneous or fast-track accession, because it's an agreed process between London and Edinburgh, because the United Kingdom itself is considering to leave the European Union. So, well, we can think that Scotland would be an independent Scotland much more pro-European than the United Kingdom. But nevertheless, this is important in Scottish discussion. It will be without keeping the opt-out right for the euro, for the Schengen agreement, of course, the privilege of the United Kingdom in the EU budget or in the fisheries policy, and this is important, very important in the case of Scotland. What happened in Catalonia? What prospect for Catalonia to enjoy this fast track? Well, we don't have here agreement between London and Edinburgh. We have conflict between Madrid and Barcelona, and we don't have the RAMP state considering to leave the European Union, but Spain considered as a very pro-European member state. So we have two options. We have the option of the unilateral declaration of independence, in my view, it's simply no chance at all for Catalonia to become member. Catalonia wouldn't even join the United Nations because there is no case at all for a remedial secession for the reasons given by Jeff. So we may agree that there is unrest in Catalonia about how to accommodate Catalonia in Spain, and there is a growing feeling asking for more autonomy, even independence. It's clear for the opinion polls, but there is no case for remedial secession. Even Kosovo, which in my view has right because of remedial secession, because in a very, very extraordinary case of crimes against human rights, dissolution of Yugoslavia, intervention of the United Nations, and still today 100 countries don't recognize Kosovo, and it's not a member of the United Nations. That is option B. In case of a traumatic process, but at the end recognized by Spain, there are some prospects, but very, very few. Who would oppose to the Catalan accession? Not only Spain, not only Spain. Other countries with centrifugal movement, fearing the precedent and a snowball effect. Cyprus, because of North Cyprus. Greece, for friendship with Cyprus. Romania and Slovakia with important Hungarian minorities. Belgium, Italy. Italy not only with Panania, but also with South Tyrol. France, with a part of France itself called Catalonia North. Germany, considering that secessionism has been fueled by the crisis and austerity policy, never will support the bid for independence. And most member states, if not all of them, because the partner is Spain, not Catalonia. The union is a union of states. The states are the lords of the treaties. And it has to do with how we consider the nature of the European Union. The European Union is an organization made by the state to protect themselves, basically. Of course, well, we are not going to discuss about theory of European integration, but, well, even European Union institution may block it. I'm not saying that Catalonia is betraying the European ideals of solidarity and human integration. I'm not saying that, but it's possible to make a case of that. Because if you are asking independence because of a fiscal mistreatment, well, it's not particularly nice to have your case on that, considering European ideals. And it's very sad from a European point of view as well, the idea that European Union state cannot be able to encompass more than one nationality. It's against the idea of the European Union to create multinational polities. So, to conclude, my last slide. An independent Catalonia would become a new state in international law and wouldn't inherit any of the treaty obligations of Spain and have to renegotiate and reapply European Union. Notwithstanding this, there is an area where political flexibility, political negotiation. However, it is quite unfeasible to expect that flexibility from Madrid. Because it's quite rational for Madrid to highlight the difficulties of an independent state moving precisely to try to shape Catalan public opinion in this discussion. I'm sorry for being so long. I have only 20 minutes for discussion, sorry, but I finish here. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. So we have a wide variety of interesting perspective about the Catalonian question. We don't have much time. The panel closes at 6. So I suggest that we take a round of questions, and then I ask that you please identify yourself and try to be very brief with your questions so we have time to take as many as possible. Yes.
Hi, my name is Eduard Ballori. I'm a visiting scholar in the Department of Sociology at NYU. Well, thanks for organizing this. It has been very interesting. There are two things I wanna address. One, I believe that the ethnic approach in the Catalan case doesn't properly apply if you think in all the ethnic cases that happened in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe, sorry. And if you think in the American case, this is something very obvious. There is people of fifth generation that identify themselves as Irish Americans, as Korean Americans, and this doesn't make them to feel in a different way on the loyalty to the country. So on that sense, the difference between this more Catalan, more Spanish, etc., is something that when you see the position of the individuals on how this Catalonia should be placed in the as a polity, is something that there is no correlation on that. So this.
In terms of
Jeff,
No,
I suggest
yeah,
let's wait.
Yeah, and the second thing is also related with the colonial approach. I think that the colonial approach is a little bit old, and clearly the case of Quebec and Scotland show that what happened in a democracy is when you have an important part of the population of a polity that is clearly defined in a liberal democracy, then there is something happening there. What surprised to me, and I would like to ask Nacho particularly on that, is that, but all the panel, is that I believe that if the Spanish government doesn't answer somehow these demands of Catalonia, it's going to be the first case in modern history that a liberal democracy has a clear majority in a well-defined polity inside the country without giving any answer to that.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
My name is Thomas Bisson. I do history at Harvard, or used to do. This symposium, marvelously informative in all its aspects, of course, has dealt with the political, the economic, the constitutional implications of the Catalan concern with independence. But I think I'm especially with Laia in her talk in emphasizing that the history of all of this is very pertinent, along with the economic and political arguments. And for me, as somebody who lives in the 12th century, 9/11 doesn't mean 1714. It means going back to the 12th century. Catalonia, the region we've been talking about here, was the first, other than France and England, to define its space territorially and politically. It did so already before 1200. The other regions that are compared with Catalonia in this respect, Galicia, the Basques, the Gascons, the Bretons, the Welsh, the Scots, and so forth, all were in a very comparable position then, in some ways still are, but they were then, but none of them had achieved nearly the measure of independence. Socially, ethnically, especially in terms of language, culture, and indeed literature, it was very remarkable. Indeed, around 1200, Catalonia was a nation in the sense that Spain was not at all, not even Castile or Leon was monarchies. They had long traditions going back to the Visigoths, but so had the Catalans. What I'm arguing simply is that there is a historical case that should be pushed back behind the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries that validates in some ways, gives a kind of force, such as it is, to the historical dimension of this new movement that you've all been talking about. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Borja Echevarria. I'm a Nieman Fellow in Harvard this year. I'm managing editor of El País in Spain. I'm an ex-student here this year. My question is, it's a question for any of you. What are the effects in civic society that the alleged cases of corruption in Catalonia do you think they're going to have over this feeling for the independence? Now we've seen how it's growing, the support for independence. And I would like to know what do you think the effects are going to be?
One final question, José Manuel.
Yeah, so well, why Convergencia ever really played the role of trying to get autodetermination in a constitutional form, the whole state, the Spanish constitution, when in the complete moment in history that they had the power to sort of push it?
Okay, so we have all these questions. We have 5 minutes left, so you have 1 minute to answer each one of you. Let's start in the order in which you presented. So, Laia, you want to go first?
Okay, so
I'm sorry. Could you just announce that there will be a second session?
Yeah, and we can do that at the end.
The second session?
I
So there's going to be a second session of this panel on April 10th at 2:15 p.m. Yes.
So about the history, we don't have time to go back to too much on history, but I really appreciate the insights. About the corruption, I'm not convinced it's going to have a big effect on the movement. I'm not seeing. The last CEO poll is pretty robust with what was going on. It's even like increasing, and the fact that that one of the biggest corruption cases in Spain is protagonized by the royal family. I think that basically feeds more the movement, no, the secessionist movement, because like obviously the Catalan independentists are Republicans and they don't want to have a monarchy, and even less a monarchy that steals money from taxpayers. Let me though, I don't want to leave without giving a short reply to Jeff, because like he went after me and I feel it's a bit unfair that some of the right. No, because I am a bit confused about your theory. So basically, first you talk about ethnicity, and as Eduard pointed out, the Catalan case is not a case about an ethnic conflict. You point out the names of the leaders of the Asamblea Nacional Catalana, but I worry that maybe you have picked up this group maybe purposely, because why didn't you go to and pick up the coup, for example, the leader of the coup, left-wing secessionist movement, David Fernandez, Spanish last name. I have a list of leaders of the secessionist movement that have Spanish last names. Some people like David Castillo, Alfredo Rodríguez Picó, Héctor López Buzfill, López Tena, Salvador García Ruiz, Marc Álvaro, Requejo, even Joan Coscubiela has been in favor of the referendum. Sergi López, Patricia Garbancho, and well, mainly like David Fernandez, no, who basically himself defines himself as someone who comes from working class, from a Spanish-speaking family. So I worry that you are providing a biased story here, and I don't want people to go back home thinking that this is not a story about an ethnic conflict. This is a story about a civic nationalism, democratic, that basically basically with the demonstrations on the streets, no violence whatsoever, not a few, no violence whatsoever, is making some very, very legitimate demands. Democratic referendum to define the boundaries of a state. I don't think that there's anything particularly like delinquent about this, right? So be careful about making this sort of like biased picture of the movement. Then about your story, so as I said, I mean, political science, we study mobilization all the time. Obviously, the elites try to mobilize the masses. Obviously, the elites are always more radical than the voters, always. And the militants of so basically, the militants of the parties are always more militant than the leaders, and the leaders are also like are less radical than the militants, but they're more radical than the citizens. So what is surprising what you're telling me? Why didn't you show me data on ideological position? You would have found the same. The elites are always more to the extremes. Also, you present me data on elites. Who are these elites? You are not interviewing all of them. Only a sample of 54 people. Where are the other ones? Why is there only one representative of Ciudadanos in your sample? One of two of PP? I mean, the parliament in Catalonia has all these representatives that are also representing people who have different preferences. And so if you do a sample of elites, do it well. And
thank you, Laia.
That's the story.
Carles?
Sorry.
Laia.
Tell me how you did it.
Carles?
That's all right. To make it a bit more complex, in fact, if you go to the medieval chronicles, there are Garcias, Catalan citizens that helped the king at that time that were called Garcia. So, measuring by family name is tricky. On very few points. The first one on the international law. International law certainly has a procedure for colonies, not for those that are not colonies. But this doesn't mean that secession has been declared to be unlawful. The only real constraint that the ICG imposes is the principle of utis possidetis, which means that states that already exist cannot take advantage of secession movements to change borders that pre-existed the conflict. That's fundamental. And I think that this is the way we should interpret Article 4.2 of the Treaty of the European Union. The animus of the legislator doesn't mean anything. Spain wanted lots of things. In fact, wanted a more radical measure on borders until it was reminded that this would imply giving up on Gibraltar. And then they sort of moved away from, they backed down from what they wanted. The second thing is, there are lots of things, but the second thing is the system as it is broken. It's broken. A place where some regions have services, all the same, but some have 25% of the population as public employees in the south, whereas in Catalonia only 9% have public employees, is a broken system that has tremendous implications for everyone, not just for Catalans. And so I think that the Spanish government and everyone has to really reflect on this, because this movement goes beyond questions just about Catalonia. The third thing is on the treaties of European Union. I think Nacho made a wonderful presentation. I want to just, 30 seconds, even complexify this even a bit more. I understand that ex ante, Spain's dominant strategy is to threaten with exclusion. That's what anyone does, especially a weak state, a state that cannot develop an alternative that makes people feel good about themselves, uses Europe as a prison to imprison, as a cage to imprison everyone inside. This is bad policy, right? We don't know exposed what would happen. It could be that Spain accepts, and then I think quick exclusion is a political thing. In the same way, these declarations by Romano Prodi and others are all political. They come from direct pressure, and I know from European members of parliament that there was direct pressure from the government, Spanish government, after there were declarations by someone, I can't remember her name now, in Sevilla. On the possibility of secession being something that could be possible. So could be that exposed things change, it could be accepted, it could be excluded, and that's where things become very messy. First of all, because Europe is many things. It's not just the internal market, there's Schengen, there's the euro, there are lots of things. There's one thing. The second thing is that there is a problem, and that the European treaties recognize citizens' rights to the members of the European Union. So the Spanish citizenship is embedded into the European citizenship. It turns out that the Spanish constitution says in Article 11 that you cannot take the Spanish citizenship from a Spanish people. And so then the question is Spain going to reach, sort of not recognize Catalonia and then strip the nationality from their populations in Catalonia, or is it going to remain neutral? It's really complicated. It's really bad that we do not have much time. But it's, there is a politics there that we have to keep in mind, since laws are flexible. And the problem with Spain is that instead of being flexible, there is this trying, very hard to kind of narrow things to just one solution. And that's where the problem is. The problem really is not in Catalonia. The problem is in Spain. And it has to change. Otherwise, there is no way out.
Thank you, Carlos. Jeff?
Yeah.
Can I just make a clarification? I would like to know how you did your survey.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, the survey was done. There was at least 25 Spanish scholars involved in it from all different regions, including Jordi Munoz was involved in it. So it was a representative sample of parliamentary elites. The reason why there was one Ciudadanos, there's 3 in the whole parliament. So. Anyhow, it's with respect to this question of is it an ethnic movement or is it not an ethnic movement, certainly at the level of political discourse, it's been very important for them to talk about the civic nature and not use exclusionary terminology and this sort of stuff. Nevertheless, when it comes to predicting not only patterns of identification, but also voting patterns, you mentioned Irish Americans. It's much closer to Latin Americans in this country. In fact, predicting voting Democrat or Republican, if you're Latin American, it's a really important factor that people talk about. And in Catalonia, we can say that your language or ethnicity predicts less than, for example, if you're born black in this country, but it predicts probably a little bit more than if you're born Latin American in this country. So we're talking about voting patterns and things like this. So whether or not, so there's two different levels. One is the level of political discourse, and the other is the level of the level of sociological analysis of the basis of support. So with respect to this list of people I think COUP is interesting, but COUP is unrepresentative in that respect. COUP is mostly people, this is this new left-wing independentist party, and there is a high percentage of people who have one name which is a Spanish name and another name which is a Catalan name. So they're the true mixed population, if you will, but also lots of people are purely Catalan. If you look at the people who vote for them, it's also there's an important percentage, more so than, let's say, Esquerra or Convergencia, but it still is mostly an ethnic party. So I'm talking about looking at the bases of support. I'm not talking about the political discourse here. Now, with respect to the story, the story about the story that you tell, that you say, Laia, that the elites are always more radical. I'm not sure that that's true, but the thing that is particularly interesting about the Catalan case is that you would expect then the elites to be polarized and more radical than their population. But instead what you see is the elites are all on one side of it. So the socialist elites are much more Catalanist than their electorate. So if it was just a story about elites being more radical, then you should expect the socialist elites to be more Españolista than their voters. But instead, you see a story which is it's a story that seems more plausible with respect to the organic links of the nationalist movement to the party hierarchies. Nevertheless, I don't think it's necessarily that strange if we think about, again, we go back to the way in which the Catalan sort of ethnicity is layered into the social structure. So it's a middle class movement, it's et cetera. So that an ideological position, I think, is not. It doesn't have the same shift where the elites are all on one side. Okay, and I already made the point about it being a representative sample. So the story about the history, I think the history is important for understanding the deep roots of the nationalist sentiment. But I don't think that in terms of constitutional rights that history, I'm not convinced that just because you have a historical basis to a certain kind of self-consciousness that your political rights flow from that. I believe more in terms of that your rights come as a citizen of a constitution. So, but that's a debate that we can have with respect to what kind of cultural does belonging to a certain culture give you a right to independence. I'm not sure about that. Now, with respect to this point about the alleged corruption and its the clear corruption, right? Its effects on. I think that you definitely see effects already in terms of Convergencias getting hit in favor of Esquerra Republicana, which is less hit in terms of corruption. Also, the rise of parties like Ciudadans and on the other hand, CUP, which are parties that are kind of anti-establishment parties that I think that in terms of the basic establishment parties are all going to be suffering from this. The PP in Catalonia, of course, is not very strong, but the socialists the PP is getting smashed at the national level, but the socialists aren't taking advantage of this. So you're seeing a polarization of the electorate, a kind of opening up of the electorate and a fragmentation of the party system, which is something that that the corruption is contributing to, but a lot of different factors are contributing to that. The last issue with respect to this, thinking about the colonial model, is the colonial model outdated? I do think it's important to note that the driving intuition behind the colonial model is this idea that if you have severe, sort of severe trampling upon basic fundamental rights, this is what gives you a right for a collectivity to self-determine itself. That's the basic intuition behind it, and I just don't think that the conditions are there in Catalonia. Now, I do think, but let's think about it democratically. I think the precedent of the Canadian Constitutional Tribunal is interesting here. It's interesting, though, that they say very clearly that there's not a unilateral right to secede. Okay, and so I think so. Let's think democratically. I think there's a good example of a democratic way of dealing with border issues, which is in the Swiss Constitution, with a Swiss case with the Canton of Jura, which seceded to create its own new canton, and the way that it from a bigger canton, and the way that they did it is they did it by district by district, in fact. So we can think about it, and then after they did it district by district, then they had a referendum throughout all of Switzerland. And so it had to be passed not only in every district. So this would mean, like, for example, and let's do it in Catalonia, comarca por comarca. Okay, well, it's a democratic decision over borders.
Jeff, I think
Anyhow, so
we need
so
to
there,
finish. Yeah.
so there are a few democratic examples, but the basic democratic intuition is the principle of affected interest. When my interests are affected, I should have a say in the outcome. And so that claim goes against a unilateral right from a democratic perspective.
Thank you, Jeff. Nacho.
Well, I
yes, I agree.
Nacho.
I agree with Carlos that we are before charter waters, and there is no, it's not unlawful to declare independent. But I think that what I said is that there is not a question of law. It's a political question. And I think that you have answered to your own comment. You said Spain is a weak state. Well, to some extent, it's a weak state. Every member state, except for Germany, probably are weak state in the European Union. But you have said after that, Spain was able to change the position of the Commission on that after Viviane Reding's hesitating. So Spain is influent enough to do that. So well, because the European Union is a union of states. And that's the truth. And answering to your question, well, we may perhaps disagree with the dominant European vision on democracy and secession, but at least I have 3 examples within European Union member states: North Cyprus, South Tyrol, Italy, and Alan Island, Finland, in which a consistent majority or consistent minority in a territory who wants to become independent has not been allowed to do it in the European Union, liberal democracies. So there are several examples. And of course, it's very difficult to manage a situation in which there is a permanent majority in a territory who wants to leave the state, of course. But the truth is that the dominant vision in the European Union, not to mention Republika Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina or Mitrovica in Kosovo, in which the European Union, the CFSP, so the external action of the European Union, is consistently opposing the majoritarian willing of the Serbs to succeed from Bosnia and Herzegovina or Kosovo. So, well, there is a doctrine in the European Union on that is not so nice for the vision from Catalonia on which is the attitude, the approach of the European Union on this problem.
Okay. Sofia, you wanted to announce the 2 events.
Yes, so just to let everybody know that this event here, thank you all for coming very much, is going to have another follow-up event that is going to take place on April 10th, and that will focus more specifically on the European dimension. That will have José Álvarez Junco, a professor of history from Madrid, who was also the director of the Centro de Estudios Constitucionales during the period in which the Second Statute was being negotiated. Will be here. Glenn Morgan, a political scientist political theorist who writes on the European Union, will be here, and José Manuel Martínez Sierra, the director of the Colegio Real Complutense, will participate as well. And in addition to that, I just wanted to let everybody know that we are also helping to sponsor an event that has been organized by Álvaro Santana Acuña, who's here, and Daniel, the last name, Núñez, from the Graduate School of Design. This will be on March 25th, and it is an event on the real estate crash and the austerity economics in Spain. We will have a series of speakers as well. I think I probably shouldn't list them all here. They are all on our website.
So before I finish, I want to recognize the support that we have received from the Real Colegio Complutense, the Elcano Institute, to organize this event. I want to thank the 4 speakers. They have traveled from afar to be here with us for the spirited debate and opinions on this important question. And thank you to all of you for your patience. We follow a well-established Spanish tradition to finish late, and for that I apologize. Thank you for your patience, and hopefully we'll see you in a few weeks.